So welcome everybody, and Happy New Year's. I'm really pleased you could all join us this evening. My name's Stephen High. I'm the Executive Director of the John and Mabel Ringling Museum of Art, and pleased to be part of this consortium of institutions that are making Skyway possible. I'd like to welcome my board members and our circle members who are joining us tonight. Thank you for your support and your support of our exhibition programs. It's invaluable. It enables us to be able to do what we can do. I also want to thank our colleagues and other visitors and guests to the program coming from our other institutions involved in the Skyway Museum, Skyway exhibition. And that's the Museum of Fine Arts in St. Petersburg. And Kristen Shepard is the director and CEO there. We have the Tampa Museum of Art and Michael Tomer is the executive director of the Tampa Museum, and the USF Contemporary Art Museum. And Margaret Miller, it's great to see you there in front of me on first screen here, and great to have you here tonight and participating in the project. So we're really thrilled to be able to host this first program around the Skyway 2021 exhibition. And I know there will be many more coming down the road, but it's time to get started on this project. But before we do, I do want to thank some of the people that helped make the exhibition possible, our community partners and corporate sponsors that really make this happen and make it a region-wide event. So they include the City of St. Petersburg, the Florida Department of State and the Division of Cultural Affairs, the Golubov Foundation, Gulf Coast Community Foundation, the Herald Tribune Media Group, Dr. Alan Root, the Sarasota County Tourist Development Tax, the Tampa Bay Times, and WUSF. There's going to be an exhibition published with this catalog, and that was generously supported by the Stanton Store and Bracy Arts Foundation and Brown & Brown Insurance. So I want to thank all of our sponsors for making this exhibition possible. Now I want to turn it over to Laura STEEFEL-MOORE, our head of educational programs here at the Ringling Museum and our moderator for tonight. Laura, take it away.
All right, thanks, Stephen, and thanks everyone for being here. It's so nice to have all of you with us. So again, this night is really a discussion of the curatorial collaboration that has made this exhibition possible, or that will make this exhibition possible, as well as insight into each curator's practice and a behind-the-scenes glimpse into their work. So we're really excited to have the wonderful curators here with us tonight. I did want to mention that as we get closer to the opening of the exhibition, we will be scheduling additional public programs that feature the artists themselves. But tonight we are happy to be able to shine a spotlight on the curators. So I'm going to ask them each to just introduce themselves very briefly, and I will be sharing the text of their bios in the chat with you so you can read through that as well. So maybe Chris, if you want to kick us off with introductions, that would be great.
Sure. Hello, everyone. My name is Chris Jones, and I am the Stanton B. and Nancy W. Kaplan Curator of Photography and Media Art at the Ringling Museum.
Thanks, Chris. And Ola, do you want to go next?
Hi, thanks, Laura. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for being here. My name is WLUSEK, and I'm the Keith D. and Linda L. Monda Curator of Modern and Contemporary Art at the Ringling.
Ola, and Joanna, maybe you can go next.
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is JOANNA ROBOTHAM, and I'm the Curator of Modern and Contemporary Art at the Tampa Museum of Art.
And Sarah?
Hi, I'm Sarah Howard. I'm Curator of Public Art and Social Practice at the University of South Florida Institute for Research in Art, which includes the Contemporary Art Museum, the Print and Sculpture Atelier Graphic Studio, and the Public Art Program.
Thank you, Sarah. And last but not least, Catherine.
Hi, I'm Catherine Pill. I'm the Curator of Contemporary Art at the Museum of Fine Arts in St. Pete. And I'm also going to introduce our guest juror and curator, who is Claire Tincons. who is not currently on the call, but we do hope she'll be joining us soon. She's based in Berlin. It's almost midnight there, and she has a toddler. So let's hope she's able to join us. And I am going to read her bio, and I hope she'll get on the Zoom shortly. Claire Tancons is a curator and scholar invested in the post-colonial politics of production and exhibition. She's charted a distinct curatorial and scholarly path in performance, inflecting global art historical genealogies with African diasporic aesthetics. Her practice involves a decentering and othering of curatorial methodologies as part of a wider reflection on global conditions of cultural production. Just a few of her highlights include Tide by Side, which was the opening ceremony of the Faena district of Miami Beach, Uphill Down Hall, a BMW Tate Live commission at the Turbine Hall at Tate Modern, and En Masse, Carnival and Performance Art of the Caribbean. That was organized and presented by the Contemporary Art Center New Orleans, and it was co-organized as a traveling exhibition to 5 additional venues by Independent Curators International, and it also has an accompanying catalog. Tancons has also curated for established and emerging international biennials, such as Prospect One New Orleans, the Guangzhou Biennial in 2008, the Cape Town Biennial in 2009, the Biennale Benin in 2012, the Göteborg Biennial in 2013, and most recently, the Sharjah Biennial in 2019. Her awards are many and include a Creative Capital Andy Warhol Foundation Arts Writers Grant for her book in progress, Roadworks, Processional Performance in the New Millennium. She holds an MA in Museum Studies from the École de Louvre in Paris and an MA in Art History from the Courtauld Institute of Art in London. Born in Guadeloupe, she ideally is going to be joining us via Zoom from Berlin. So thank you.
Thanks, Catherine. And so I know many people on the call tonight are familiar with Skyway. Some of our artists are here tonight, but not everybody is. So I'm hoping that we can begin the evening with a brief discussion of the 2017 iteration of Skyway. So I'm going to ask Catherine, Chris, and Joanna, who were all involved in that project, to just speak a little bit about what that show was, what it meant to each institution. And as you do that, I have a couple of install shots that I will cycle through to just give people a sense of what that first show was like.
So I'll just jump right in. When we were approached by our directors to organize Skyway, it was something that we, it was our first kind of attempt to do a collaborative exhibition across our 3 institutions. I know it had come across in conversations between my director, Michael Tomore, and his counterparts at the Ringling and the Museum of Fine Arts. Prior to Skyway, the Tampa Museum of Art and the MFA had collaborated on an exhibition on contemporary Chinese art. And so this was a way to kind of expand that collaborative effort between our institutions. Ooh, excuse me. And we learned along the way, and hopefully the artists in the first round of Skyway, they were wonderful. They were patient with us as we tried to figure out, the online submission program, how to divvy up artists between institutions, and also working with a team of 5 curators. The 3 from the team are on here tonight, but we also had, the team also included Robin Odell, who is the curator of photography at the MFA, and Seth Pevnik, our curator of Greek and Roman art. And so we were a team of very diverse interests, and pulling together a team of curators can always be a bit of a tricky thing, but we got together and we actually had a really great time doing it. So I'm gonna pass the torch now.
Yeah, it's really an exercise in this cross-venue collaboration. And thank you, Joanna, for mentioning my generation, because that was the first time there'd been that sort of cross-venue collaboration. And I think it's pretty unique. I don't know of many institutions working in such proximity to one another that are actually collaborating on exhibitions like this one. And so obviously we love it so much, we wanted to do it again, and not only do that, but expand it to an additional venue.
Yeah,
I was actually, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm sorry, did you have more?
I was just going to say, I was, going through the catalog of the last iteration, and it's just amazing to see how many people come to Florida from all across the country. But then I'm thinking about some of the artists who have also left Florida in that time. So it's been interesting to see which artists have come back for the second iteration and not.
Yeah, I think one aspect of this show that is really rewarding is that it would sort of a snapshot a little bit of, what's going on in the region at the moment, and it's interesting, as you notice, Catherine, that just in a few years, so many folks have moved away, and there are new artists to the community, and so it's the catalogs especially, but the exhibitions sort of capture what's going on, in these sort of three-year segments. I just wanted to add too that, at the beginning, at the onset, when we were sort of planning for and discussing this project, I mean, it really felt like, kind of undiscovered country in a way. I mean, it was sort of, it felt very experimental. I mean, there were like discussions about, can we even do this? Is it feasible? Is it logistically possible to have, one exhibition in 3 venues at the same time? What does that mean? How do we coordinate, even the minutia of it? And, it's really exciting that we're now on the second iteration, because we've kind of learned and grown and expanded from the first time around. And as you said, now we have a new collaborator, USF Contemporary Art Museum. So that's really exciting.
And I'll say one other thing that we were very conscious of is that we didn't want to too closely replicate exhibitions that were similar in the state. Like the Orlando Museum has their Florida Prize. We really wanted to differentiate this by only exhibiting artists who are from the counties that our museums directly serve.
Mm-hmm. And we also tried to make the work as recent as possible. I think in each of the iterations of Skyway, we've limited it to work really that's been made within the past year or so. I think last time it was within a 2-year window, if I remember correctly. I mean, something like that. So the idea is that we want work that's really, really fresh, and so that we can really enter the conversations that are going on right now at the moment.
And what's really nice is that we are able to really have a cross-generational show. Like, for example, in the installation shots from the Tampa Museum of Art, you see, Bruce Marsh's work, who has been a long-term artist in the area, and, of course, instructor up at USF for many years, paired with someone like Kay Kinder, who I think was a recent grad at the time. So you're able to see these really interesting dialogues between different generations of artists. But this time around, what I think is really quite interesting is to have, new curatorial eyes on this project, to have Ola and Sarah join us on this version. I think it really brings a different lens. Both of them have very distinct, curatorial practices. Ola, coming from Canada, brings, an international look to the exhibition. And Sarah, of course, with just her many years of, also being an artist, being involved in the artist community here. She is, someone who's always been kind of at the grassroots level of the artist community here. So we have a really, I think, wonderful breadth of curatorial eyes on this year's Skyway.
So I'd like to talk a little bit more about that, because I think sometimes you may think, oh, well, a curator is a curator is a curator, and you just do this very specific job. But this idea that each of you have a very specific practice and bring these your own ideas and your own framework. Can you talk a little bit about, for each of you, how the process of working on something like Skyway is different from what you typically do as a curator? Thinking about notions of collaboration and exchange of ideas, and maybe where the similarities are, where it is in some ways very typical of your practice, and just kind of a behind the scenes look at how you go about curating a show with collaborators like this.
Yeah, I mean, I will admit that at the beginning of the first Skyway, I had some trepidation about, working with a group of curators. It's sort of like if you have, 5 curators in a room together, you've suddenly got probably 7 different opinions all of a sudden. But I have to say that, like, remarkably, we all gelled and got along together quite well. And I think part of it is because we each had really kind of different visions in a way that I think complemented one another quite a bit, you know, and I in the course of the program, I myself got to know, you know, JOANNA and KATHERINE, and to kind of learn about their perspectives and get to appreciate, you know, how they approached looking at art and what they particularly look for in work that is compelling. And so, you know, that helped me to kind of see through other eyes as well. I don't know if the reciprocal was true or not, but I think that whenever we work with other people, it helps for us to expand, you know, our look into works of art. I have had the pleasure of sitting on a few jury panels with KATHERINE in the intervening years, and it's gotten to where, like, if I see a work of art come up, I think to myself, I bet that's something that KATHERINE would be really, you know, interested in or excited about. So in some ways, I feel like I've gotten to know some of my local colleagues here and gotten to appreciate what they do quite a bit.
Yeah, I would echo Chris's sentiment there that the collaborative opportunity here to, you know, work. I mean, we're all colleagues, but we don't often get to really kind of roll up our sleeves and work together. Is just a great opportunity to learn from one another and expand our ideas around the work and engage with artists locally, which, you know, isn't often, we you know, we don't often get to do the multitude of studio visits that we were able to do in this iteration. And that was a really enjoyable aspect of embracing this.
I would also like to add that I came into the Ringling Museum already with quite a collaborative background and a desire to collaborate. So I was definitely super happy to learn that there was a project such as Skyway previously and already in the works when I arrived. And selfishly, it was such an amazing exercise for a contemporary curator to, of course, do so many studio visits, or even before that, to have the opportunity to develop a call to artists that was quite expansive or asked for a multitude of different types of projects. So anything from, you know, the traditional media of sculpture and, of course, painting, which are exciting, to having the ability and opportunity to realize that the curators at the other institutions are also very much so excited to work with artists who work in different media, such as social practice or community engagement, performance art. So it was a great, meaningful opportunity to get to know who are the, you know, key players at other institutions and how wonderful and open they are as curators. And something that everyone's saying, I'm echoing this, is that we worked so well together because we're quite flexible and open as curators within our approaches to curating to begin with.
And before the pandemic, what was really fun was we would pair up. Some of you who had studio visits with us, you know, we were bringing, you know, I would go on studio visits with Ola and Chris, or sometimes KATHERINE and I were visiting artists. Sarah, I don't think actually you and I had a chance to pair up for any, but they were these really nice kind of pairings, and it was really wonderful to be able to go on studio visits with another curator because, again, each one of us conducts a studio visit differently. So it's a chance to learn and see my colleagues at work. So I always appreciate the opportunity to learn from my colleagues.
I wanted to ask about Claire as well, and I don't think she's been able to join us yet, but you know, you have this group, this network, your colleagues, you've been working together. It's a very local show with local artists, and then we have Claire joining us from overseas. So why was it important for you to have a guest curator? And then how did you come to select Claire? What about her practice really appealed to you, and how did you make that selection of inviting her?
We decided with the first iteration that it would be really important to have a guest curator or juror to offer a perspective that is completely outside of the Tampa Bay area, and also that also gives exposure to the artist, to a curator from different institutions. For the first iteration, it was Diana Nawi, who was at the Perez. She's now an independent curator in Los Angeles and one of the co-curators of the Prospect One Biennial in New Orleans. And then with Claire, I mean, she has a totally global perspective. I mean, thinking about all the biennials she's worked on, including the first Prospect One Biennial. And I think having that sort of perspective was going to be really helpful to all of us and to the artists. So I think Claire is updating the essay that she wrote for the catalog because so much has happened over the past year and this, you know, the pushing back of the exhibition. But I don't know what the other curators think. I mean, she has a really unique kind of practice.
Yeah, I agree. And I had been following her work. I admire her many projects that she's done and how she's really pushed art, you know, into the street and really pulls from those carnival and performative and processional traditions. And that's something, a little bit of that flavor that we were hoping to bring into this call, and it's sort of expanding the call to engage those kind of those formats and, you know, methods into the work.
I will say in general too, it feels very important to bring in an outside voice and perspective, especially, I mean, looking at, you know, artists from our region. And a lot of it's because we do need someone who is looking from the outside, basically, right? I mean, because a lot of us work with many of the artists in the region, you know, we know them, some of them are our friends. You know, we're all kind of enmeshed in this arts community. So it's good to have, you know, a judicious eye from the outside, really, to kind of make an assessment about, you know, what's going on. And sometimes, you know, when they've got a little bit more of a bigger picture, fresh eyes, they can see different connections, they can see value in work, perhaps that we've overlooked or missed. Sometimes something that's right in front of you, you don't notice quite as much, you know. So it's good to have someone to come in and offer fresh eyes. And it's also great to have someone who's working internationally, potentially, you know, come and engage with artists in our community. And I think that's important too, to make these sort of connections to help connect our broader Tampa Bay community to the international arts conversation.
So several of you have mentioned already in comments that you really were hoping to get a diversity of submissions. And can you give us a little bit of a look at how did you craft your call to artists to really, you know, solicit a diversity of submissions? And then once you had the submissions, how do you go about narrowing it down? Can you talk us through what that process was like?
I think something that I touched upon before was that, again, coming into this as a new person, I looked at what the call was before, and perhaps what was missing, what practices were not necessarily specified, called it out to, and included necessarily through, you know, language, word usage, and structuring the new call in a way for it to feel more inclusive, accessible, and really pointing to different types of practices, such as I've mentioned before, social practice, community engagements, maybe ways of working for artists that our audiences might not necessarily think about as museum ready, such as what does it mean as an artist to go and work within communities and not necessarily produce a product that's viable, that's being able to be shown on a gallery wall. What does that look like? Why is that meaningful? So just thinking about how to attract types of artists who work in kind of new ways, different ways, untraditional ways. So that was something that we were thinking about as well.
What was really interesting is we reviewed submissions. I think we had almost about the same amount of entries from the last time. In 2017, we had a little bit over 300. I think we had about the same number this time around, but in looking at the submissions, we saw, I think, a broader range of artists. So it wasn't necessarily artists who were trained at our, you know, who had art school training, but they were, you know, artists who were maybe working on the weekend, but, doing really interesting, work within collectives within the Bay Area that we, didn't know of. So it brought in, I think, a different range of artists, a more diverse range of artists than I think we saw the first time around, which was quite interesting to have those discussions about, culling it down to the final. I think this year we had maybe 51 artists in Skyway. And, we can be, pretty honest with you, it was really difficult to even get down to that number because there were so many artists that really attracted our eye. And, just we had to find a way to, kind of have that cutoff number, but we were really surprised at, the entries that we received because there was such a really broader range this year. Katherine and Chris, would you agree compared to the first time around?
Yeah, I think that's a good characterization. Absolutely. An increase of, more self-taught artists. And we did want to make sure that we were showing that one of our venues at least would have the capacity to work with a more social practice-based practice.
So Katherine, that leads me to my next question, which is how do you, once you've narrowed it down and you have your selection, how do you decide which artists will be shown at which institution?
I think we only gave ourselves a few parameters. We always try to host artists in a venue that's outside of where they live. We wanted to make sure that if we had artists who were in the first iteration, that they didn't show in the same venue again. And then I know our institution was interested in teasing out some type of loose theme that would sort of work between the artists at our institution. So we're really looking at artists engaging with the natural environment in obviously a myriad of ways. It certainly didn't narrow down the media, but it just makes for, more of a sense of cohesion, which you can do when there's 4 different venues.
Yeah, and also since USF has had such a huge contribution and many of the artists working in the area have either graduated from USF or are employed there, we tried to not show those artists at our venue and highlight artists from some of the other areas in the counties included.
Yeah, and I will say for us at the Ringling Museum, even though we're sort of part of the broader Tampa Bay community, that bridge, the Skyway Bridge, is in some ways, can be a barrier between our arts communities. So I think it's been really beneficial for artists here in Sarasota, based in Sarasota and Bradenton, to be able to show up in St. Pete and in Tampa. The first iteration of Skyway, I was surprised how infrequently artists here in Sarasota were connecting with the communities, north of us in Tampa and St. Pete. And so I think that a lot of really great connections were made, and vice versa too. It's rare that artists from Tampa and St. Pete, are showing work here in Sarasota. I think, between St. Pete and Tampa, there's much more correspondence and communication, but even then, sometimes there's often not as much kind of intermixing between communities around the Bay. So that's why we're hoping as much as possible to try to cross-pollinate and show work from artists outside of the immediate community.
So obviously the show has had to be delayed because of the pandemic. And so there have been a lot of seismic shifts in society over the past year, to say the least. So you mentioned, you made the studio visits, you reviewed the submissions, but I imagine a lot is changing for the artists as well as for the institutions. So, what sort of initially surprised you or excited you about the submissions, and do you anticipate work changing by the time the show is installed from the original submission? And what is that sort of dialogue like back and forth with the artists as they're responding to current events?
Oh, Sarah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I've been, sort of over the course of the past 9 months or whatever we're in now, touching base with the artists to see sort of where they're at, update them with, what our plans are when we were postponing, when we thought we could determine, new dates, and checking in with them about sort of, where they were at. I think some artists really took advantage of the opportunity to make new work. Some people had residencies already planned, and some people are really interested in staying the course for what they had submitted and have prepared and ready to go. And so I think it's a little bit of, where they are, and some are taking this additional time to really ramp up and make some ambitious new work for us to showcase, which is really exciting.
I'm in the process of getting in touch with all the artists showing at the Tampa Museum of Art and resuming our studio visits, just to catch up to see what type of work they've made over the past year. And even I'm kind of starting to pick up that communication again. I was really grateful. Mike Solomon, who's showing at TMA, sent me an article about what artists had been up to. And I think it was actually in Sarasota's newspaper. And it was interesting. They focused in on John Sims, who's also in Skyway, Bruce Marsh, who was in the last iteration, and then Mike's work. And it was so fascinating to see that in the past year that their work is completely changed from what, or not changed, but they were working on projects completely different from what they submitted to Skyway. So I'm curious, all of you artists on there, when we have our conversations, please share with us what you've been working on for the past year. I imagine, even looking at some of the Mike Solomon paintings that he was doing of, healthcare workers on the front lines, that some of the work is going to be really raw and incredibly powerful. And of course, we expect that from what we're going to see in this round of Skyway. Not to say that the first round wasn't, because we were going through very different things in 2017. Of course, we were just getting into the Trump administration. I think we were still trying to feel out some of the, what this new climate looked like. And now in the past, 9-10 months, everything is completely shifted all over the place, where, we wake up now and we don't really know what's going on. So it's interesting. It's going to be really fascinating to see how the artists tackle that in their artwork. For example, one artist, and I know he's on here, Kirk Wang, who showed at the Ringling last time around, the work that he submitted for this year's Skyway was quite different. It was a painting looking at discrimination in the Asian community. And this was before the pandemic. And so it'd be interesting. I look forward to having a conversation with Kirk when we pick it up again, to see where that type of concept, where that's gone, because now that has a completely different interpretation. So we look forward to hearing all these different ideas and how the artists have survived during this past year.
So I want to pick up on this idea of evolution. Chris, at the beginning, you mentioned, when you first heard of this project, back for the 2017 iteration, you were like, can this even happen, right? And then you realize that it can, and then you've expanded it this time around. How do you see, and this is to all the curators, how do you see Skyway evolving as times change? Could it ever be a virtual exhibition? Could it expand to include other institutions? What do you think the future of Skyway is, or is it too hard to know given all the uncertainties we're currently dealing with?
As a newcomer and not having seen our, iteration yet, I think it could certainly expand. And I think we've realized that we can do a lot of things virtually now that we, didn't anticipate before. And I think it could really expand in exciting new directions. I think we could take it out into the public realm. We could, expand it, include other institutions. I know, and at some points when we were talking about how to potentially encourage people to visit all the venues, we were sort of talking about ways to provide, kind of these connections, like if we would have like a bus tour, or at one point we were talking about the Cross Bay Ferry. I mean, I think there's a lot of potential, and I think this time period has really expanded our ideas about what is, what we can achieve, and with the kind of coalition building that we've had to do during this time to, connect and stay connected has been really valuable. And I think will, help us to sort of expand those ideas further.
And I think what's really important to acknowledge is that even within the past 3 years between the two different Skyway exhibitions is that we've seen a proliferation of art organizations, art spaces open up, not only in Tampa, but just across the region. And so, big or small, we have, the Sarasota Museum of Art, and then you have something like Fairgrounds in St. Pete. So it'd be curious to see if, other institutions would be willing to partner with us or have that interest, because we are growing as an arts community. And I think that's what's incredibly exciting to see how the Tampa Bay area is evolving. So I think as our area evolves, Skyway will evolve.
And I would just add that, of course, there's potential for going online and virtual, but as we went into a shutdown, right when we were scheduling, opening Skyway, essentially, there was discussion about making it an online exhibition. At least, it crossed my mind as a curator. I started looking into, 3D exhibitions. And I'm just so thankful that our institutions were able to work together to push this back a year and to have this exhibition in person in our venues. And as much as I believe that it could have been virtual, I'm really happy that we've managed to have it be in person.
Just to pick up on something that Joanna mentioned a moment ago, one of the things, actually, even in the very first iteration of Skyway, one of the things that we discussed was the possibility of, bringing in as collaborative partners, alternative art spaces and some of the smaller art spaces, community-oriented ones around the Tampa Bay region. And also ways in which Skyway can expand beyond just the kind of gallery and museum walls. And, I think that we made some small steps towards that in the current iteration of Skyway, but I think that's something that we can continue to kind of think. It would be great if Skyway could expand to be, a whole sort of season-long series of events that happen in institutions and also in alternative art spaces, community spaces, at the same time. So that's something that I think there are frontiers there to explore for the third iteration.
I think artists will be almost the best people and arts practitioners to answer this type of question, right? It's what practices will emerge out of this moment and mark this moment, and how art and art making will not necessarily evolve, but what types of support it will need. And as institutions and curators, we'll have to think about, the ways we can offer support, but I guess for that only time can tell as far as resources are concerned and our own abilities and I guess even imaginations.
I have to, at this point, I have to really give a shout out to the Gobia Foundation and the Stanton Store Foundation for supporting Skyway from the start, because not only does that help us evolve and grow Skyway, but I think just that commitment to recognizing and supporting local artists is huge. We need that type of support in the community, and they have been true pioneers, true beacons in showing local artists that they are committed to having that work shown in our organization. So thank you to Stanton, to JOANNA and Neil, if you're on the line. We really could not do this without you, without your partnership and your trust in us to execute this show.
And I think that might be a great time to actually open it up to whoever is on the call for questions. We do have one question that came through the chat. Caitlin is saying, Catherine talked about a theme with MFA St. Pete, but if curators from the other institutions, are you working with a sort of thematic framework, and can you address that?
Initially, we had another show scheduled to be paired with our presentation of Skyway. And so I was sort of working under the umbrella theme broadly of a sort of material exploration and transformation. So that was something I was exploring. And since we've changed our schedule now, we are able to use the whole museum. So we're really excited to be able to feature more work from each artist.
Here at the Ringling Museum, we'll be showing work by 8 artists who work in very different ways. So one thing that will be quite visible at the museum is just the variety of the different media. So we'll have presentation of work in a photo-based practice, sculpture, painting, performance, digital art. So I think that's the theme, is the lack of it, is really just the diversity and the variety. And I think that will make for quite a exciting, dynamic presentation as an exhibition. And what's also different and exciting here at the Ringling is that we'll be expanding beyond the Monda Gallery space, which is a fantastic space for contemporary art. But this time we'll also be devoting some of the galleries within Searing. So definitely having just more of a square footage is a great benefit to present a larger body of work by each of the artists. And that's something that Chris and I talked about in the beginning, that we wanted to show a little bit more work by each of the artists, and definitely having more space will allow that.
Great, thanks. So I've been hogging all the questions. We've got a powerhouse here, a curatorial brain trust. So I want to open it up at this time to anyone on the call who has other questions or comments to share with our curators here. You can either just unmute or you can put them in the chat. And we did have a comment from Marge, who's really excited to see the shows at each of the venues. And she's saying that your collaboration is an important model of social leadership in our politically stressed times. I totally agree.
Are you planning any performance, either complimentary or as part of Skyway?
We're hoping to. I have, at least in the Tampa Museum of Art's presentation of it, I think 1 or 2 artists who part of the work is quite performative. So I do hope that we will have some performance during our run of Skyway.
Yeah, we won't this year, but it was so great to have Cassia Kite's sound stitching project at the MFA. For the last iteration, we had Cassia and her collaborators do a performance as well as a panel, which was wonderful.
And we're getting some questions from the chat about, has Skyway yet been recognized outside of our community in the art world? And Jason's chiming in, agreeing, how can Skyway become part of the national discourse? So if curators have any ideas for that.
I think perhaps one way will be for our catalog to be well distributed and circulated. I think it's a great opportunity to promote the exhibition and promote the project, and have this amazing kind of almost like an archival document that's publishable, that will be published in memory of the exhibition, but it will be available. We're planning to have it available before the shows open, and then have it in circulation during the life of the exhibition at each of the venues. So spreading the word through our wonderful local community is great too. Cross-promoting on social media, sharing, reposting is also much appreciated. So there are just kind of like simple ways, but very meaningful ways to spread the word, because if anything, that just helps promote the wonderful talent that we have here in Tampa Bay region, and all the great work that each of the institutions are doing.
I know that whenever I mention Skyway to curators or other museum colleagues outside of Florida, they're always quite interested to know what we're doing. And so every chance I have to talk about this collaborative effort, they're, for one, kind of surprised to see a collaboration between 4 institutions, because that is really quite unheard of. And I think truly, not to put our marketing and PR teams on the spot, let's, we hope that we can have some, broad distribution of, say, the press release to some of those key art outlets, because we are a fascinating, wacky, beautiful state. And I think our artists do a brilliant job of capturing the essence of what is happening here on the ground, and thinking about their art, not just in terms of what it means to be an artist working in the Tampa Bay area, but so many of them are working right along the lines of what's happening across the world. So, you know, it's that we as curators, I think we can hype up our show as much as we can, but we really truly need the help of all of our colleagues to spread the word and to get that word out. And of course, we would love to see some major press pick up Skyway.
Yeah, I would say the first thing would be, I guess, you know, to keep doing this, to continue, you know, doing this project. And because each time we do, it feels like things expand. You know, USF Contemporary Art Museum is part of the collaboration this year. You know, if we were to do it again in a few more years, we perhaps can expand the group of collaborators, you know, even more. You know, think about how Skyway can be, you know, out in the public more, and not just in the museum spaces. And I think that, you know, the more that we do it, the more innovation, you know, comes about. But also, you know, I think here's an idea for all of us curatorial colleagues. You know, maybe we need to propose panels at AAM or something, or kind of get the word out about what we're doing as well, because it is really a kind of signal, you know, event to have now 4 institutions simultaneously hosting, you know, the same exhibition. I can't think of a similar project really anywhere.
I would think that like maybe something like Pacific Standard Time, but that is a little bit of a different model. It's not necessarily where the whole curatorial teams come together and have that one-on-one dialogue. That I think what perhaps our audience doesn't know is that we actually meet quite frequently, or at least before the pandemic, I think we were meeting at least once a month or every 6 to 8 weeks. We would meet at the MFA, is kind of the central point between all of our institutions. And during the pandemic, we would meet virtually. And I think what's really key about that, oh my gosh, I think I just lost my train of thought. Remind me, Chris, what were you just saying?
Well, we're talking about the sort of unique nature of this, because, and you mentioned Pacific Time as being somewhat of a similar, a sort of moniker under which a lot of arts events and programs happen in California.
Exactly, but I think that they kind of operate independently of one another. And I think the point I was trying to make is that we truly do work together as a team to execute this show. And I think that you're right, that there isn't, I also can't think of another model where the teams are working this closely together.
So we've had one more question come through the chat, a great question from Samson, who's saying, how have the events of 2020 affected your curatorial eye, if at all?
That's such a good question. And it's hard to have self-reflexivity as we're still kind of in the midst of everything, right? Not much has changed. If anything, there are more and more events shaping the state of our world today. So I guess time will tell once again, but if anything, I think just logistically and practically, we had to shift to kind of being more in silos because we had to go virtual. But at the same time, I think if anything, I personally truly feel like I've gained, 3 amazing colleagues from other institutions. I feel like I'm just as much in collaboration with them as I am with my colleagues here at the Ringling. So that has been really lovely. It's been really lovely to also think about and appreciate the times where we were able to meet in person. And I think, if anything, also thinking about how we can take care of each other as humans sharing this particular area of land. And if anything, it made me think about Skyway and how relevant and important it is, especially at this time where, as you know, we're all part of a larger institution that often takes touring shows and works with artists from elsewhere, which is of course just as important, but it's also very important at a time like this to come together as a community, and we can do that through this exhibition. So I guess it is a timely project, and particularly because what's happening out there in the world and in our community today.
Samson, to be, really brutally honest, I don't know how it's affected my curatorial eye because I've really gone into lockdown. I admit I haven't seen a lot of art in person since the pandemic started. So I will be really curious to see what all the artists kind of share with me over our Zoom studio visits, which of course is going to be, not the ideal way to conduct studio visits, but for everybody's safety, it's the best course of action right now. And I will be really curious to see how my eye has shifted or changed from, I think in the last studio visit I did was, maybe with Catherine, maybe last December. I can't recall, but we'll see. I don't know yet, Samson.
I would agree. I don't really know how my curatorial eye will have shifted, but I do feel like this has been a really important time to reflect on the role of the institution and the museum in our society and look at our practices and make sure that we are continuing to work against sort of this systemic racism that exists across our society. And as an institution, I think it's really important that we take this time to look at that and recalibrate where we can and moving forward.
So we're right at 6:30 now. I want to be mindful of everyone's time. I want to thank all of you for being here and especially our curators for sharing all their wisdom. I'm going to turn it over to John to just give some closing remarks.
Oh, thank you. I'm John Melicky with the Ringling. And I just want to thank everyone for participating in tonight's discussion and being a part of this first virtual event for the Ringling on Skyway. We look forward to doing more different aspects of showing Skyway throughout the year before we have the opening, which of course starts on May 22nd at the St. Pete Museum of Fine Arts and continues all the way through June. The dates for each of the different museums is in the chat box that you can see. So we look forward to seeing you then and at our next virtual events. Thank you and have a good night.